Welcome to SheVC. I'm your host and founder, Gayatri Sarkar. I started SheVC to change the 2.7% status quo funding of female founders and make VC more accessible to everyone. But the world has changed now. Due to the pandemic, rather it is changing every hour. The harshest brunt is faced by the early stage startups and small businesses. There's a rising fear, but at the same time, we have hope. Today, we have an amazing storyteller who's going to talk about hope and also the frontier technologies that she's investing. She went to Harvard Business School, was a partner for 10 years in $250 million fund, and for the last 4 years, she has been the founder of the first AI fund called Glasswing Ventures, investing out of $112 million VC fund. Some of her advisors are Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of World Wide Web, Sandy Pentland, director of MIT Connection Science and Human Dynamics, Bruce Schneider, the foremost leading mind in cybersecurity. So we have Rudina Seseri, founder and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures. Welcome to SheVC.
Thank you for having me, Gayatri. It's good to see you.
Yes, thank you for being here. And we are so lucky to hear from you directly. So Rudina, as investor in Inrupt, which is founded by Tim Berners-Lee, Verusen, Talla, Zylotech, Celtra. And she's also a venture partner at Rock Center, Harvard Business School. So we want to hear from Rudina that you have invested in some of the most innovative AI startups. That includes Inrupt, as I said before. Considering the threat that we are living in right now, how do you think artificial intelligence can help us better prepare for the next innovation? And why did you decide to focus on specifically the frontier technologies and artificial intelligence?
So again, thank you for having me today virtually,
Yes.
in makeshift offices that we've created in our homes. So the focus on artificial intelligence for myself and Glasswing, the firm that I founded and I'm a managing partner at, fundamentally stemmed from a view that as data explosion has become all pervasive, in combination with algorithms, where we've seen quite a bit of breakthroughs around machine learning in particular and different types of learning approaches, would become the genesis for creating a new wave of disruption. And I and my co-founder at Glasswing Ventures, Rick Grinnell, were partners in another firm, as you indicated during your introduction, and had shared that view that something utterly transformative from a frontier tech perspective was taking place, and we were investing in those companies as early as the 2012-2013 timeframe. And out of that work, out of those investments, we fundamentally came to the view that AI in the what and machine learning and data in the how, embedded in software solutions would be transformative. So let me now decouple sort of your question in two parts.
Great.
The first part being why AI. I think I tried to address, and as it pertains to Glasswing, we're an early stage firm investing in enterprise platforms and cybersecurity companies where AI is embedded in the product. As far as the pandemic is concerned, I will share with you two thoughts. One, it extends into the healthcare arena where we are not investors in. We invest in areas where we have domain expertise and a track record of performance, and healthcare is not in one of those areas. But I think the opportunity, there's opportunity for data to play a role. If you look at cases like Singapore or South Korea, where digital app and app adoption and usage is way more pervasive, many of the governments have actually sent apps, made available, I should say, apps that masses have downloaded, that in fact they are very much Big Brother watching, apps that are tracking movements.
Right.
And that doesn't even involve any intelligence or any AI, maybe some level of degree of analytics and predictives, but doesn't even require fundamental AI, if you will. All that has enabled those governments is to be able to track people and who they came into contact with, such that if I were a case of a positive COVID-19, but asymptomatic, they immediately would know by tracking the phone who I'd come into contact with.
Right.
They'd also know if I was being non-compliant with the quarantine rules. It has been an effective approach from at least the data that we are all seeing at the current inning. By the same token, it poses a lot of privacy questions, a lot of, like I said, Big Brother questions that are perhaps beyond the scope of this discussion. Shifting the gear a little bit to Glasswing, you referenced several times in your introduction Inrupt and Sir Timothy Berners-Lee. So what the vision behind Inrupt as Solid, the open source platform that has been created, is the idea that consumers and enterprises should have ownership of their data and be able to give applications access to the data and then suspend access. What does that mean and why should we care? So fundamentally today, if you think about Uber or Lyft, and maybe my calendar, I'll give you a consumer example. In my calendar today, all of my data tied around my schedule, my identity is trapped there. It's my data, but it's trapped in that app and I don't have ownership of it. So the calendar provider, whoever it might be, whether it's Google or Microsoft or others, are using it for their benefit, not to customize or personalize to me. Similarly, I was speaking on Uber and Lyft, they're also squatting on my data. So
absolutely,
for lack of a better term, our app environment on our mobile phones is very much tied, reflects the 1990s Yahoo walled gardens. It's just a new, in a new environment, in a mobile environment. And so in a world where we're still moving again, and when we're not trapped in our homes, I see no reason why, and there isn't a technical reason why, if I chose, I would enable a calendar access to my data, not ownership to my data, and Uber or Lyft access to my data, not ownership of my data, such that when the calendar indicated a meeting was about to end, an Uber was called completely automatically and was waiting for me. So it is not a tech barrier to have that kind of value created at the individual level. It's actually a data barrier. So coming back to Inrupt, in their case, they're doing a ton of work to bring power back to the consumers and to the businesses of owning their own data. And that paradigm could be transformative, completely, world changing in the context of COVID-19. Because if I have my data, including my healthcare data, tied around my identity in a private and security compliant manner, as I get sick, all I have to do is give my doctor access to that data in real time, and they can make decisions rather than looking where it's sitting and completely dispersed. So it's actually the data being tied to the identity and being put in a pod without going too technical on it. But bottom line, I think data, more so even than AI, is playing a fundamental role in the pandemic. I don't know if I fully answered your questions.
No, you did, because you touch base the points which are major concerns. Like I personally don't use Uber as such, Uber or Lyft, and I try not to, but it helps because I live in the suburbs. But when I go to my New York home, I have to use it because I don't have a choice. Otherwise, I have to use Subway. And I think this is a major concern for many people who understands the data and the psychometry analysis that is being done by a lot of marketing companies and others. So it's definitely scary. So talking about Glasswing and the way you're looking at things, this is something that you have been doing for such a long period of time. You have been in your previous fund for 10 years. And venture capital, like invest, is not an industry that it's not something that you can do your coursework at MBA or you can prepare for as such. The early stage startups investing needs a different kind of mindset, and so it's a very hard industry to prepare for. And you're someone who came from a different country. You came to this country and you became a partner, and you worked in some of the top technological platforms and big corporates, and your background has helped to shape the Glasswing Ventures and the investment thesis. So tell us about your past experiences that made you who you are, and your experience that helped you to start this fund.
Oh, wow, that's a lot. Let me see how I can separate that in pieces. So my background, yes, I came from Albania, studied at Wellesley College in undergrad, then worked on Wall Street, at the time at Credit Suisse First Boston in the technology group. So this was in the 2000 and then 2001.
The dot-com time.
The first. So I've been through now 2 cycles. This is the third, between 2001 and 2008 and the 2020. But lots of learning experiences. In fact, as a 20-some-year-old around the 2001 recession and tech burst, both in terms of what it could do to markets, etc., but also around sort of work ethic and how Wall Street was transformed during that period, even more so around the crisis of 2008. But the upside was I caught the tech bug. So I was focused on technology, both on the hardware and the software side, doing transactions ranging from LBOs to M&A and public financings of sorts. And so became very passionate about that area. Then at HBS remained focused on tech and tech-related opportunities. In fact, I did a spring internship with my old firm, Fairhaven Capital, and through one of their partners, Rick Grinnell, who, as I referenced earlier, became my partner and co-founder at Glasswing.
So the relationship matters.
And very long-standing relationships matter, especially if you're going to start a new firm, as we did a few years back. And then I worked at Microsoft, and I think that, coming back to your question, that experience was also extremely relevant, because early stage venture, I would say, if I had to boil it down to 2 or 3 nuggets of what really matters, I think is the ability to have a deep understanding of the operational side, execution. There is plenty of great technology that never sees the light of day. And there are many, many great ideas. I often joke to make a point that I have 100 good ideas myself a day. What it comes down is to having a deep execution ability, to being sort of extremely focused, knowing when to say no as much as knowing when to pursue from an opportunity perspective, and resilience. So I think that, back to what prepares one to be in venture, I think operational experience and understanding that is important. Passion for innovation and tech. Oftentimes, I feel like I live in the future. You're investing today for platforms and products that will become, or at least you're helping enable increasing the chances for them to become major market players in the 3 to 5 to 7 years. So the ability to be sufficiently grounded, but also feel passionate about innovation, transformation, that thinking differently, the creativity piece. I think that's also very important. And to that end, at Glasswing, we are thesis-driven investors. So you had made a reference about how do we approach opportunities, and we fundamentally develop a view of the market. So,
Right.
data is the backbone, automation and human augmentation, vertical strategies or vertical industries that can be disrupted by AI, and then pursue opportunities within those markets, within those theses. So being grounded and being deeply knowledgeable about the markets one invests in is also important. And then fundamentally, being humble.
Yeah.
Your highs are high, your lows are low. And I have a co-investor who was interested. We were having a conversation, and he said, look, we always experience VCs that come into two elks or in two categories. They walk into a boardroom and they're the mighty and high VC, or they walk into a boardroom and they're there to help their companies. And Glasswing is of the latter category. And it's very gratifying to hear that, because fundamentally we view ourselves as early stage investors as an extension to the team. We're there to roll our sleeves. If we can lend a customer on their behalf, or make, at least at a minimum, make the introduction, all hands on deck. If we can recruit the executives to expand the executive team, all hands on deck. We are there to reduce the chances for failure and expand the chances for success.
That's a great term, reduce the chances of failure and expand the chances of success. I think you spoke about some of the very fundamental ideas that you are looking at through your investment theses in your fund. Also, venture capital, as always said, is about identifying patterns in time, and that's what you do and other VCs do. Yet we are seeing that our policy leaders have failed to recognize the patterns, of the other infected countries around this pandemic. And now we are seeing how we all are actually focusing on how to flatten the curve. So unpredictability is right now a pattern in our life. So bigger innovative ideas are unpredictable, and sometimes challenging to many people. Sometimes those investment decisions can be non-consensus among partners. So to invest in such unpredictable big ideas, one has to learn and see things in very differently, analyze markets very differently, and look at markets that others are finding it non-sexy to invest in. So what kind of system thinking and mental models do you approach to back such investments?
So I go back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. It's thesis-based investing. So, for example, if someone came today and said, I have the vaccine and the cure for corona, while I would believe that would change the pattern of what we find ourselves in, we would not look at it. So it's because it's not a thesis and it's not a domain expertise of the firm. So through that example, I'm both trying to convey that we actually first and foremost are market-based investors. So enterprise, what are the opportunities? Well, right now we're focused on how to leverage data as a backbone to make data access cheaper, better, faster, whether it is leveraging AI and ML to reduce cloud storage costs, to reduce multi and hybrid cloud storage management, right? Most enterprises are now in multiple hybrid clouds, in multiple clouds through their applications and where the data resides. Whether it is to use it in supply chain, where it's one of the verticals that's particularly hardly hit in the current circumstances. I'm also using that example to make another point, which is discipline. What we do not do is we will not invest in markets where we don't have conviction, data, and a fully blown analysis and a market view. That is very, very important. At least for our strategy, the shiny object syndrome can be dangerous, and we stay disciplined to our thesis. So I've talked several times, if you notice, about enterprise cybersecurity platforms.
Yeah.
because that's how we view the world. Where AI, whether the various machine learning techniques and in combination with the data access or data usage come into play, is we look for every solution targeting those end markets. We look for AI to be embedded in them because we fundamentally believe that the old-fashioned software where you code, you iterate, you QA, you go to market, and then you continue to add features, and then you probably scrap that entire code and have to do a ton of rebuilding them for more higher scalability and lots of refactoring and have tech debt and all those joys. Will be largely replaced by the fact that you want to embed data and you want to embed ML so that the software is continuously iterating, learning, and improving. And it's a different, honestly, it's a whole different ball game from the get-go. The initial setup effort is longer. You're training the algorithms. You really have to be mindful if the data is high quality, it has the right levels of diversity, veracity, and just sheer size and quality. And then, so that is as much art as it is science in this early innings of AI, despite all the noise in the market. So you leverage those, and then as you're training the algorithms, and I often say to my portfolio companies that day one is when they're least valuable. The algorithms are still learning. But from that moment on, compared to your old-fashioned software, they're continuously iterating, improving, and learning. So if all execution is there, it should outperform every single time.
Absolutely. I love what you said. Their most learning point is that when they're least valuable, because that's the time they can learn, they can grow. And I feel once the pandemic settles, we will see a lot of new market behavior. Can you elaborate on some of the new market opportunities that you can see in the deep tech investment world globally, and the importance of how AI is going to play in effect?
So I think from an AI perspective, I think, cybersecurity, which is an area that we're very active on through our investments, will become even more pervasive. I think I'm no futurist to predict what our social behaviors or even how our society will come out on the other side, what will be new behaviors that will settle for the long term and others that will revert back to. But I will tell you that if remote working was already a trend, I think we'll see a lot more of that. And in an environment of remote working, the attacks to large enterprises have increased. Actually, the data that we have is 3,000-fold.
Wow.
And so how do you harness that? The old-fashioned secure, the castle and with the moats around it no longer, actually is sufficient. So how do you secure data wherever it resides and track it? So we have made a number of investments around that area, and I think we will continue to be very active in it. I will also say that we are gradually seeing the emergence of other technologies that perhaps in the tunnel that we're in around the world sort of melting down, perhaps we're not as focused on, but going beyond AI as a frontier tech, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we should all have a chuckle around having, AI as a strategy, because fundamentally it would be a layer in any product that we use if it's not already, and it will be all pervasive. Much like today, could you fathom having an internet strategy? So I think, but as that gets settled and AI becomes all pervasive, I think advancements and disruptions around quantum computing, around the sort of, if you want to push AI somewhat toward the healthcare bit, but not quite crossing that chasm, brain and human interfaces, or computer brain interfaces, and that relationship and the dichotomy. So there are big opportunities that are very early in there, and in some cases there are startups around quantum, there are startups around these interfaces, but I think we'll see a lot more disruption and a lot more adoption of that next set of frontier tech.
That's great. And the two things that is keeping the world falling apart is our healthcare system, the healthcare workers, and now there is a supply chain management. And you invested in Verusen, that you said, which is a supply chain tech startup. Do you see any changes that's going to bring in effect with this pandemic, especially in the supply chain technology?
So in this environment, as you can imagine, the last few weeks we have been intensely working with our portfolio companies, because as the world has come to a screeching halt, the number one question you ask is, what does this mean for each of my companies and for my portfolio management? And the good news is that from a Glasswing perspective, because we are B2B investors, and particularly leveraging data and AI in every investment that we make, we've seen a higher level of insulation, if you will, and resilience vis-a-vis some of the consumer companies where they have, revenue has dropped to zero and come to a screeching halt, at least for this, what I hope is a relatively short-term environment. Interestingly, in a subset of the portfolio, we've actually seen increased demand, which I find astounding. And Verusen being one of those examples, which is why I make a reference to that trend, because supply chain, one of my big worries was, oh gosh, the world is coming, supply chain has been highly disrupted. How do we deal with that? But what Verusen does is it helps manufacturers optimize their inventory levels, especially for non-production parts inventories, such that they can optimize on when they're using the part and when they have it in stock versus when they need to order it. I find it quite interesting, but supply chain is a very old sort of school industry. They're still mostly on premise in terms
Very
of,
true.
is not in the cloud. So it is not uncommon that they could be emergency ordering a part as they're trying to come back online, not realizing that they have it 5 times from 5 different vendors with 5 different codes, bars or however, whatever the coding system might be, as they're tracking them. So Verusen comes in, takes hold of all that data, cleans it, harmonizes it, gives a view, and then goes well beyond predictives. It goes into prescriptives, so that as if you're trying to manage this level of cost and this level of inventory optimization, this is how you should order, this is who you should order, and this is the packet or the number of parts you should order. I'm severely oversimplifying it, but just to convey the idea. So Verusen is one of those companies that in this environment, as they're focusing on taking every penny out of the system and making sure that they're leveraging existing inventory versus parts that might not be arriving, etc. Demand for those guys has been quite strong.
Mm-hmm. I think you touched base a little bit also about how you're seeing a surge in the demand of most of your startups, but also as
not most, but as I said, I want to be honest, not most, but they are in general, more insulated. That's a fact.
Right. And how do you, so as a firm, I feel like in our fund, sports has been highly affected, and we're trying to see how can we save some of our startups, some of the funds some of the startups where we sit on board. How do you think coronavirus is affecting? Obviously they are affecting in certain ways, but how your firm is preparing for that with this sudden change, and how you are also, and how your founders are preparing you guys to for this changes to come in effect, and what's your blueprint for the next 7 to 8 months for this?
Absolutely. So, as I shared with you earlier, we've been heads down working with every single one of our companies to tackle the current circumstances. And fundamentally, our companies, before it even comes up to Glasswing or our co-investors, have gone through the analysis to ensure that they have 12 to 18 months of runway. And 12 or 18 months of runway, not simply on account of the budgets that they previously had. We obviously have had, you have to scrap those at this point, but
Right.
making draconian assumptions of the nature that What if you had zero incremental revenue in the next 2 quarters, and in Q4, you had a much more modest level of growth and sort of a lot more conservative assumptions around top line growth. What would the ramifications be when, in some instances, the cost cutting efforts have been triggered immediately? In other instances, to be perfectly honest, dollars have been taken from one department and invested more and spent more in other areas. Completely sort of as an aside example, but we have companies like Celtra where the digital budgets have gone through the roof because most brands and most companies, there are no physical events to be had, so whatever budgets were for conferences and elsewhere are now being deployed in digital. Well, new assets are being created. They leverage AI to automate asset creation, digital asset creation. So all of a sudden they're seeing more demand. I would have never expected that. So it's interesting the ways how this crisis has manifested itself. But coming back to your question, so extending the runway, taking advantage of the available resources, as you're probably tracking, I think right now the House is discussing the passage of the stimulus bill, the $2 trillion stimulus bill. There are provisions in it around loans for small businesses, both directly through the SBA and also what's known as 7A qualified lenders on behalf of the SBA. We've been deeply involved with that because they've put quite a few barriers around startups that have taken venture capital funding. So finding, both leveraging our lobbying arm to push against that, just because the company, if the goal of the government is to keep folks employed, just because they're VC backed, it might ensure for the top performers that the VCs will put additional funding in place, but it doesn't ensure that they will not do layoffs. So it defeats the purpose. So we're doing a ton of work around that. We're also helping them on the customer side, where we have strong relationships to just ensure that that's in place. They're working with their customers around payment terms to create some flexibility. So whatever can be done to retain customers, to grow to the extent there is the opportunity, but fundamentally to ensure that they have the runway and the resilience to weather the storm. Then it comes to Glasswing and our co-investors with co-lead with other firms, and we have sufficient reserves to support the right companies. But it is a moment where every startup takes a hard look at who they are, what they do, and what their trajectory going forward will be.
That's amazing. I love how Glasswing is supporting its portfolio companies and the upcoming portfolio companies. So one of the things that I want to appreciate that you being a part of SheVC coming here and, by coming here means virtually being here and, giving your time, especially considering that you're the first woman founder of an AI venture capital fund, maybe in the world. So
I'm not making such claims. I don't know, but we were one of the first funds focused.
Yes,
on
absolutely. Sure. And venture capital is one industry that I think that has not been disrupted as such. We are still working the way we had been working before, and there are so many biases and prejudices that are played in effect. And I feel like we are seeing many people, especially like you, who are bringing movement into this industry. So how do you think when you came into this industry, what are the barriers, what are the biases that you have faced, and how that has changed you to be a catalyst for change?
Yeah. So it's a big question. A few thoughts. I will give you sort of the gut reaction and perhaps a less filtered answer to say, in my day role, I have forgotten my gender. And what I mean by that is I'm well past someone said this, did they say it because it's me or because I'm a woman? I'm one voice, and hopefully a voice that earns her seat around the board table, around the decision making. And if someone says something to me that I don't like or has been a barrier and whatnot, you tailor your approach to the individual rather than try to define it or undefine it along gender lines. Not because it may not be around gender lines, but because fundamentally you march forward and lead by example. So that's one piece. The other piece is, you know, as one tries to drive change, you know, I'm not a women's activist, you know, and whatnot, but and also, if you think about back to the point of leading by example, at Glasswing, even though, you know, clearly the managing partner, you know, is a woman, there are two, you know, there's another woman partner in the fund, in addition to Rick Grinnell and the rest of our team, we never lead with that. But we lead by example. So I look at our statistics, and you know, the notion is half the battle is being in the room. And I look at the cross of our portfolio, and two things have happened. Now, when we review resumes of top executives, it is very, very hard for CEOs and founders to give you 5 resumes that are all male or very homogeneous in nature, depending on, you know, however you want to define diversity. There will be diversity in the mix. And what has changed since I started in venture 15 years ago, which is highly, highly encouraging, is CEOs are actually proactively saying, you know, I need more women on my team. It's going to be a recruiting problem if I don't have more women and more diversity on my team. That is a 2019 and 2020 phenomenon. I have never ever heard that previously. So that's one point. The bigger picture, though, you want to look at the macro trends, and VC historically has been composed of former founders from typically hard tech. And hard tech has not been an area where women have majored and studied. I mean, you know, even in the present day, I think only 10% of computer science majors are women.
True.
So we have a challenge with the funnel to begin with because it's fairly narrow. Overlay to it the fact that there is a reason why labor economists study women, for the most part not men, sorry guys. It's because women come and go into the labor force. So subset of the women change careers, subset decide to stay at home and raise a family. So there is a lot more movement. I'm not making excuses or justifications for this, you know, for the status quo. I'm merely explaining the fact that I think the funnel to begin with, in my view, is narrow. Now, what has changed for the positive, even in those macro trends, is the fact that many tech-enabled businesses today, the woman does not necessarily need to be a hard tech, you know, engineer. And a lot of venture-backed businesses, whether it's digital, whether it's other areas, don't have that requirement, and we can always, you know, always have women co-found with deeply technical co-founders, whether women or men. So I think there is change, but it's important to pay attention to the funnel, and to get more and more young girls and to study, you know, to go into STEM in general, and, you know, robotics, AI, computer science, more specifically, to be able to see this trend. But even as you compare to the 2.7% statistic that you quoted, as of 2020, 10% of VC firms are now women. You know, small step perhaps in absolute terms, but giant leap, right, relative to the 2.7%.
No, I would like to thank you for giving your time. And I would like to end on that note when you said it's important that you, when you half of the battle is done when you're in the room, and then you don't want gender to define you, who you are, and do your work, hard work. I think that's very, very important. So thank you, Rudina, for your time. And I think everybody learned so much from you, especially your investment thesis and looking towards the world, how AI is going to change it.
Thanks so much for having me again, and stay healthy and safe.
Thank you, Rudina.